7:34 in the morning. That is the exact moment Western Colombia's ground gave way, and in the hours since, this has become one of the deadliest natural disasters this country has faced in a generation. I want to walk you all through this disaster, the way it has actually unfolded, hour by hour, update by update, because the story of this earthquake is as much about the rescue operation racing against time right now as it is about the quake itself. Let's get into it. The earthquake struck at 7:34 a.m., local time on Monday, August 10th, registering magnitude 7.4, with its epicenter located just 5 kilometers east of the town of San Jose del Palmar in Colombia's Choco department, roughly 174 miles west of the capital, Bogotá. The rupture occurred at a depth of approximately 107 kilometers, a genuinely deep earthquake by regional standards, and the shaking radiated outward across an enormous stretch of the country. An estimated 34 million people across Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama felt the ground move that morning. The U.S. Geological Survey immediately classified the event with an orange alert, the second highest designation on their global impact scale, a category specifically reserved for earthquakes expected to produce significant casualties and widespread structural damage. Within minutes, that assessment proved accurate. Let me walk you all through how the casualty figures have evolved, because tracking this progression tells its own story about the scale of what rescue teams have been dealing with since the moment the ground stopped shaking. The earliest reports out of Colombia on Monday morning cited around 20 confirmed deaths, a number that climbed past 100 by Monday evening as initial damage assessments came in from the hardest hit cities. By the next update, that figure had risen to 111, then 132, then 169. As of the most recent report from Colombia's public ministry, the confirmed death toll now stands at 224, with more than 1,200 people injured and more than 3,700 individuals still reported missing. I want to be direct with y'all about what that climbing pattern actually represents. This is not a story where the worst is already known. Officials have repeatedly cautioned that these numbers are expected to continue rising as search and rescue crews keep working through collapsed structures across multiple cities simultaneously. Within hours of the earthquake, Colombia's newly inaugurated president, Abelardo de la Espriella, formally declared a national disaster, immediately authorizing the deployment of search and rescue resources to every significantly affected region. That declaration triggered what has become one of the largest simultaneous emergency response operations Colombia has mounted in recent memory, spanning 5 separate capital cities, all dealing with major structural collapse at the same time. 5 capital cities across the affected region currently remain under red alert, Colombia's highest disaster classification, a status that keeps emergency resources, personnel, and equipment prioritized toward these specific areas as recovery work continues. Complicating every hour of this rescue effort has been a persistent, dangerous aftershock sequence. At least 21 aftershocks have been recorded in the hours since the main earthquake struck, and each one forces rescue crews working inside or near damaged structures to pause, reassess stability, and in some cases evacuate a site entirely before resuming their search. I want y'all to understand why that matters so much practically. A building that survived the initial magnitude. 7.4 shock may have been left critically weakened, sitting right on the edge of full collapse, and a moderate aftershock arriving. While rescue crews are actively working inside that structure searching for survivors, can turn an already dangerous recovery operation into a second, entirely separate catastrophe. Let me take y'all through the individual cities where this rescue operation is unfolding, because the destruction is spread across a genuinely wide stretch of Western Colombia rather than concentrated in one location. Pereira, the capital of the Risaralda region, and a core city within Colombia's culturally significant coffee-growing axis, has absorbed some of the earthquake's worst damage. The Association of Capital Cities has confirmed at least 60 deaths within Pereira alone. CNN geolocated footage capturing the actual moment several buildings in the city gave way during the shaking, collapsing directly into the street. The passenger terminal at Pereira's Matacaña International Airport suffered a partial structural collapse, immediately halting flight operations. And in one of the more dramatic individual rescue stories to emerge from this disaster, 16 people were left trapped inside the city's megacable aerial cable car system for somewhere between 6 and 8 hours before emergency crews successfully evacuated every one of them to safety. Cali, Colombia's 3rd largest city, is facing its own version of this catastrophe. Local officials there report at least 188 people currently listed as missing, a staggering number that reflects both the scale of building collapse across the city and the genuine difficulty of confirming exactly who was inside which structure at the moment the earthquake struck. Footage emerging from Cali shows professional search teams working directly alongside ordinary civilian volunteers, forming long human chains to pass broken pieces of concrete and rubble hand to hand as they dig toward anyone who might still be alive beneath the wreckage. City officials have confirmed at least 20 buildings completely collapsed in Cali, with roughly 380 additional structures across the city reported damage to varying degrees. Beyond Pereira and Cali, significant destruction has also been confirmed in Quibdó, Manizales, and Armenia, with the broader Risaralda region alone accounting for at least 40 confirmed deaths. I want to spend a moment on Armenia specifically, because this city's earthquake history adds a genuinely sobering layer to today's disaster. Back in 1999, a magnitude 6.2 earthquake struck near Armenia, in the same broad coffee-growing region now affected by Monday's quake, and that disaster killed more than 185 people, devastating large sections of the city. What makes that historical comparison so unsettling is that the 1999 earthquake was both shallower and dramatically less powerful than Monday's 7.4 event, and it still produced a horrifying death toll. That comparison tells you something important and troubling about how vulnerable this specific region's building stock has historically been, even when facing an earthquake considerably weaker than the one that just struck. Let me walk you all through the aviation and infrastructure response, because the disruption here extends well beyond the immediate rescue zones. Colombia's Civil Aviation Authority suspended flight operations at 7 separate airports across the western half of the country, including facilities in Pereira, Manizales, Quibdó, Armenia, Cartago, and Buenaventura, while structural engineers conduct safety inspections to determine which runways and terminal buildings remain usable. That kind of widespread aviation shutdown creates its own cascading logistical challenge, since it directly limits how quickly additional rescue personnel, specialized equipment, and medical supplies can be flown into the hardest hit areas at exactly the moment that speed matters most. I want you all to genuinely appreciate the scale of what rescue coordinators are managing right now, because 86 confirmed building collapses spread across 5 separate major cities does not represent a single disaster site. It represents 5 simultaneous, large-scale emergency operations happening at once, all competing for the same limited pool of specialized rescue equipment, trained search and rescue teams, heavy machinery capable of safely clearing collapsed structures, and emergency medical resources. At the exact moment, every single one of these cities needs that same support in full. That kind of resource competition is exactly why international assistance becomes so critical in a disaster of this scale, and why Colombian officials have been actively coordinating with international relief organizations in the hours since the quake struck. I also want to place this disaster inside the broader tectonic and regional context, because it connects to something genuinely alarming that has been unfolding across this part of South America all year. Colombia sits along the seismically volatile Pacific Ring of Fire, specifically atop the boundary where the Nazca Plate is subducting beneath the South American plate. This exact tectonic boundary has an extraordinary history of producing some of the most powerful earthquakes ever measured anywhere on Earth, including an estimated magnitude 8 event along the Colombia-Ecuador border back in 1906, and further south along this same system, the catastrophic magnitude 8 earthquake that struck Chile in 2010. Monday's earthquake is part of that same tectonic engine, even at a considerably smaller magnitude than either of those historic events. And this earthquake did not strike in isolation this year. Less than 7 weeks earlier, on June 24th, twin earthquakes measuring magnitude 7.2 and magnitude 7.5 struck neighboring Venezuela, ultimately killing more than 6,000 people and triggering more than 1,400 recorded aftershocks in the following weeks. Rescue teams were reportedly still actively working recovery operations in Venezuela when Colombia's earthquake struck on Monday morning, meaning 2 neighboring South American nations have now both endured catastrophic, deadly earthquake disasters within less than 2 months of one another, tied to the same broad tectonic boundary running along the continent's Pacific edge. That regional pattern is exactly why seismologists across South America are watching this entire stretch of the continent with heightened concern right now, well beyond just the immediate response to Monday's quake in Colombia. I also want to walk you all through how the international community has responded in these first critical hours, because the scale of this disaster has already triggered offers of support from well beyond Colombia's own borders. Neighboring countries across South America, along with international relief organizations and multiple foreign governments, have begun coordinating with Colombian emergency management officials to determine exactly what kind of assistance would be most useful, whether that means specialized urban search and rescue teams trained specifically in collapsed structure extraction, heavy engineering equipment capable of safely clearing debris without further endangering anyone potentially still trapped beneath it, or medical personnel and supplies to support hospitals in the affected cities that are almost certainly operating well beyond their normal capacity right now. Coordinating this kind of international response takes real time, even when the will to help arrives immediately, since incoming teams need accurate information about exactly where the greatest need exists, functioning transportation routes to actually reach the hardest hit areas, and clear communication with Colombian authorities to avoid duplicating efforts or working at cross purposes with crews already on the ground. I also want to touch on the building code and construction quality questions that inevitably follow a disaster of this scale, because they matter enormously for understanding why the damage has been so severe across so many separate cities simultaneously. Colombia has made real documented investments in seismic building codes over the past several decades, particularly following the devastating 1999 Armenia earthquake I mentioned earlier, which forced a genuine national reckoning with construction standards across the country's most earthquake-prone regions. But implementing updated codes on paper and ensuring every single structure, particularly older buildings, constructed before those standards existed, actually meets them in practice, are two very different challenges. Many of the buildings that collapsed on Monday were likely constructed before the most recent generation of seismic reinforcement requirements took effect. And retrofitting older structures to meet modern standards is an expensive, time-consuming process that developing regions around the world consistently struggle to fully complete, even when the underlying engineering science is well understood and the political will to improve safety exists. This is not a criticism specific to Colombia. It is a challenge shared by earthquake-prone regions worldwide. And it is exactly the kind of systemic vulnerability that a disaster of this scale inevitably brings back into sharp public focus. I also want to explain why the coming hours matter so intensely for anybody still trapped beneath the rubble across these 5 cities, because rescue medicine operates on a genuinely brutal clock. Search and rescue professionals widely reference what is often called the golden 72-hour window following a major structural collapse, the period during which survival odds for anyone trapped remain meaningfully higher, assuming they were not critically injured in the initial collapse itself. Survival beyond that window remains possible, and rescue crews have pulled people alive from rubble many days after a quake and past disasters worldwide. But the odds decline considerably as dehydration, injury complications, and structural instability compound with each passing hour. Colombia is currently still within that critical window as I record this update, which is exactly why crews are working around the clock rather than pausing overnight, and why every additional piece of specialized equipment or trained personnel arriving in the coming hours could genuinely make the difference in how many more survivors are ultimately found alive. I also want to mention the displacement crisis unfolding alongside the search and rescue effort, because thousands of families across the affected cities no longer have a home to return to, regardless of whether their loved ones are ultimately found. Emergency shelters are being stood up across Pereira, Cali, and the other hardest-hit cities to house residents whose homes were destroyed or deemed structurally unsafe to re-enter, and that displaced populations' needs, food, clean water, medical care, and basic shelter run in parallel to the search and rescue operation rather than after it. Aftershocks continuing to rattle the region only compound this problem, since many residents remain too afraid to re-enter even structurally undamaged buildings until authorities can confirm their safety, adding further strain to an already overwhelmed shelter system working to house a rapidly growing displaced population. So let me bring this together and tell y'all exactly where things stand as I finish this update. This remains an active, unfolding disaster. Search and rescue crews are still working across Pereira, Cali, Quibdó, Manizales, and Armenia right now, racing against both the clock and a persistent aftershock sequence that keeps forcing pauses in already difficult recovery work. The casualty figures I have walked you all through this morning are almost certainly not final, and officials themselves have been clear that further increases should be expected as search operations continue into the coming days. If you have family or friends anywhere across the affected region, keep attempting to reach them through every available channel, understanding that communications infrastructure across the hardest hit cities may remain unreliable for some time, yet given the scale of the damage. If you are in a position to help, working through established international relief organizations, already coordinating directly with Colombian authorities, remains the most effective way to get real support to the people who need it most right now, rather than attempting to send aid independently into a disaster zone still actively managing its own emergency logistics. I will be tracking this situation closely as rescue operations continue, and as the true scope of both the human toll and the physical damage becomes clearer over the coming days. If this update helped you understand exactly what Colombia is facing right now, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, and share this video with anybody you know connected to this region, because a disaster unfolding across this many cities simultaneously deserves sustained attention, not just a single day's headline before the news cycle moves on. I will keep watching this story for y'all, and I will see y'all in the next one. Stay safe out there.